July 3, 2025, the day the sky burned over Al Dhafra at precisely 4:15 a.m., the pre-dawn darkness over Al Dhafra Air Base, United Arab Emirates, fractured, not with sirens, but with sudden streaks of fire cutting across the sky. A swarm of 21 Iranian suicide drones surged over the horizon, their engines humming like a swarm of metallic hornets. Among them were 10 newly upgraded Shade 238s, the crown jewels of Iran's drone arsenal, equipped with AI-driven evasion, software and short-term radar stealth coding. For 12 critical seconds, they vanished entirely from US radar screens, slipping past the base's first layer of air defense without a single warning alarm. Their target was not a barracks or an aircraft hangar. It was something far more vital, a U.S. protected strategic oil storage facility holding 1.66 million barrels of refined JP-8 jet fuel, the lifeblood of American air operations across the Middle East. The strike Iranian planners had chosen their moment with surgical precision, minimal troop rotation, night operations in full swing, thermal distortion lowering radar sensitivity, fuel tankers parked in exposed positions. It was a textbook setup for disaster, and disaster struck. At 4:18 a.m., one Shade 238 plummeted into fuel tank 03B, a 312,000-barrel storage giant. The detonation was apocalyptic, a 300-foot fireball ripped into the night sky, turning darkness into blinding daylight. The shockwaves slammed across the base, and within seconds, secondary explosions tore through parked fuel trucks. Two M1A2 Abrams tanks, idling just 80 yards from the blast, were disabled beyond repair, their steel hulls scorched and warped. The core fire temperature surged past 10 degrees Fahrenheit, melting support structures like wax. In the chaos, 5 U.S. personnel were injured, 2 with severe second-degree burns. Fire suppression teams battled the inferno for over 3 hours, but by the time the flames died, the damage was staggering: $890 million in infrastructure and fuel loss. 2 tanks destroyed, critical fuel reserves for regional operations vaporized. Shockwaves in Washington. The physical damage was immense, but the psychological blow was greater. By 6 a.m., DEFCON 3 was declared for all CENTCOM forces. Inside the Pentagon, an emergency call connected the Secretary of Defense, the CENTCOM commander, and the National Security Council. Classified drone and satellite footage began circulating. The fireball's mushroom-like plume, the twisted remains of Abrams tanks, and unmistakable fragments of Iranian drone fuselages. The most alarming detail: no interceptors had launched. No warning had been given. Iran had not merely struck, it had achieved total surprise against the most technologically advanced military on Earth. This was no symbolic provocation. It was a deliberate strike aimed at crippling U.S. operational fuel logistics in the Gulf. And in Washington, one conclusion was unanimous: this was an act of war. The counterstrike. Less than 48 hours later, the U.S. answered with overwhelming force. At dawn, the USS Curtis Wilbur and a Virginia-class submarine unleashed 28 Tomahawk cruise missiles toward Sheikh Karimi Air Base in Yas Province, Iran, the very heart of the IRGC's drone warfare program. Moments later, 12F A-18E Super Hornets roared off the deck of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, streaking toward their target. Sheikh Karimi was no ordinary airfield. High-altitude reconnaissance confirmed, newly fortified hangars, expanded underground bunkers, a suspected AI-based drone command tower. RC-135 electronic intelligence flights revealed the Shade 238 swarm had been launched using encrypted burst signals relayed through civilian trucks, cutting detection probability by 65%. Within hours, NSA's Kraken-2 AI cracked the pattern, proving state-level coordination at the highest level of Iran's military chain of command. By noon, crude oil prices had spiked 7–8%, markets reeled, and NATO issued a rare joint warning to Tehran. Behind the scenes, U.S. cyber and space assets were already repositioning for follow-on operations. But beneath the smoke and rubble of Sheikh Karimi, a far larger game was taking shape, one involving shifting alliances and a next move no one dared speak aloud. That moment came at 2:00 a.m. on July 5, 2025, in a closed-door command center buried beneath the Pentagon. Operation Desert Flash was greenlit. There would be no warnings, no press briefings. The retaliation would speak for itself in steel, fire, and fury. At 2:30 a.m., deep in the Arabian Sea, two U.S. Navy warships, a USS Virginia-class attack submarine and the USS Curtis Wilbur DDG-54, unleashed a blistering salvo of 28 Tomahawk Block V cruise missiles. Each missile, flying at nearly 550 miles per hour, carried a 1,000-pound high-explosive warhead, pre-programmed for pinpoint strikes on the Sheikh Karimi Air Base in Iran's Yazd province, the beating heart of the drone launch network that had humiliated CENTCOM just 48 hours earlier. At the exact same moment, America's answer, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, stationed 96 nautical miles off the Strait of Hormuz, launched Carrier Strike Package Alpha from its flight deck. 12F A-18E Super Hornets roared into the darkness, flanked by 4 A-18G Growlers for radar jamming and suppression of enemy air defenses. Within 22 minutes, the strike group was over Iranian airspace, flying under heavy electronic cloaking. The scene over Sheikh Karimi was apocalyptic. The Tomahawks hit first. The base's main radar array vanished in a fireball, followed by precision strikes that shredded 6 fuel bunkers, 3 UAV launch platforms, and a command node believed to house IRGC cyber operations. Secondary explosions ripped through the complex as munitions cooked off, sending shockwaves across the desert and igniting a massive blaze visible 23 miles away. Seconds later, the Super Hornets arrived like a thunderclap. They dropped GBU-32 JDAM precision bombs with surgical accuracy, collapsing to fortified UAV hangars and obliterating over a dozen Sheikh drones before they could be relocated. The Growlers unleashed AGM-8A HARM anti-radiation missiles, erasing Iran's Corded 15 air defense systems in seconds, leaving the base blind, deaf, and defenseless. The coordination was flawless. The effect was devastating. IRGC communications went silent. Iranian emergency broadcasts later confirmed 14 personnel killed, including 2 senior drone engineers. Roughly 70% of the base's operational capacity was wiped out. U.S. reconnaissance satellites later recorded IRGC trucks scrambling to evacuate damaged UAV parts under plumes of oily black smoke. Beyond the destruction, the strike carried a razor-sharp message. The U.S. knows where you launch from, and we can silence you at will. For American commanders, it was partial redemption. For Iran, it was a staggering loss. Sheikh Karimi had taken years to build, and in less than 17 minutes, it was reduced to scorched concrete and burning wreckage. Aboard the Eisenhower, a CALM voice crackled over comms, objective neutralized. Returning to carrier, 0 casualties, America had answered fire with fire. But the echo of that firestorm was only beginning. Barely 12 hours later, Tehran vowed revenge. At 4:00 p.m. on July 5th, Iran launched a sudden counterattack, 5 110 medium-range ballistic missiles. Each carried a 1,500-pound warhead and had a range of 185 miles. Their trajectory was unmistakable. Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the nerve center of U.S. air operations in the Middle East, the attack unfolded in terrifying speed. In just 6 minutes, the missiles streaked across the Gulf, forcing Al-Udeid's defenses into maximum overdrive. Patriot PAC-3 batteries locked on and fired, while the base's Seram phalanx systems spun to life, spewing 4,500 tungsten rounds per minute. Within seconds, 2 Fada missiles were destroyed midair in bright fireballs. A third was intercepted at 14,000 feet by an SM-6 missile fired from the nearby USS Carney, already on high alert patrol. But 2 Fada 110s slipped through. The first slammed into an empty section of runway, the shockwaves shattering for 100 feet of perimeter fencing. The second struck a fuel depot, detonating in a roaring explosion that injured 7 American contractors and temporarily shut down to F-15 maintenance hangars. The blaze reached 800 degrees Fahrenheit, threatening to ignite a nearby ammunition stockpile, before damage control teams brought it under control after hours of effort. The message was clear: Iran would not remain silent. Even as smoke still rose over al-Udeid, the United States moved quickly to coordinate with regional allies. Israel raised DEFCON to level 2, activated Iron Dome batteries near Eilat, and repositioned F-35I stealth fighters to forward operating bases, bracing for what would come next. Saudi Arabia opened its airspace, granting U.S. aircraft unrestricted access for immediate retaliatory operations. In the Gulf of Oman, British Type 45 destroyers shifted from escort duty to full combat readiness, unleashing their Sea Viper missile systems to reinforce the region's air defense grid. The danger of escalation now hung in the air like static before a lightning strike. Military analysts warned that even the smallest miscalculation could ignite the entire region, pulling in multiple state actors. Oil tankers rerouted overnight, sending crude prices surging past $110 a barrel, the highest level since 2022. In New York, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. Russia and China denounced the U.S. strike on Karimi Air Base, accusing Washington of destabilizing the Gulf. American diplomats, however, insisted the counterstrike was purely defensive, a calculated move to neutralize an imminent threat. Inside CENTCOM's war room, diplomacy was far from the primary concern. Intelligence feeds painted a more urgent picture. Iranian missile brigades in Bushehr and Bandar Abbas were mobilizing, possibly preparing a fresh wave of ballistic launches. As the Gulf sun sank toward the horizon, one senior U.S. commander was overheard saying, "If they fire again, we'll take the fight to their doorstep." Smoke still curled above Al-Udeid as global oil markets convulsed. In Washington, a stark post-strike report confirmed the scale of destruction. Karimi Air Base had lost 100% of its launch capacity. Infrared satellite scans showed no drone movement, no radar emissions, and no thermal signatures from generators. The installation that once symbolized Iran's drone supremacy now lay in cratered ruin. In Tehran, the IRGC quietly began relocating the remnants of its UAV production network to a newly fortified underground complex near Trier, a move expected to delay operational capability by 4 to 6 weeks. NSA intercepts hinted at panic, engineers working around the clock, supply routes rerouted, and rumors of disciplinary action against commanders who had failed to foresee the American strike. But Washington had no intention of letting the operation, and there, as part of Operation Fortified Gulf, CENTCOM launched the most significant regional force restructuring since 2003. A second aircraft carrier, USS Theodore Roosevelt, entered the Gulf of Oman with a strike group of 8 warships, including 2 Aegis destroyers and 3 logistics support vessels. Simultaneously, THAAD batteries were deployed to the UAE and Bahrain, adding another layer to the region's high-altitude missile defense. From Diego Garcia, B-1B Lancers rotated on 6-hour standby patrols, providing an ever-present deterrent. In the skies, the price tag for these moves was staggering. The Department of Defense allocated an emergency $3.2 billion for logistical reinforcements focused solely on protecting critical energy infrastructure. U.S. Cyber Command elevated its defensive posture, rolling out quantum shield protocols across all CENTCOM networks to blunt a retaliatory cyber onslaught that had already surged by 300% within 48 hours. Beyond the missiles, money, and megabytes, the strike carried a message: America's logistics are not a soft target. Back home, the operation dominated the airwaves. Footage of burning depots and triumphant fighter jet returns triggered a wave of patriotism among Americans over 55. Support for military action spiked by 19 points overnight. Flags went up, People looked skyward as the USS Eisenhower slipped silently toward the horizon, her radar sweeping the dark waters for the next threat. One truth echoed in every combat deck, command tent, and war room: this wasn't the end. It was the warning. The Gulf was quieter now, but silence was no guarantee of stability. In just 4 days, the world had seen a compressed display of modern escalation: Iran's covert UAV strike, America's surgical retaliation, ballistic missiles in flight, and rapid deployment of air and naval firepower on both sides. It wasn't merely a contest of bombs and bodies. It was a war of capabilities, resolve, and messaging. Iran's drone network lay crippled, but not gone. US oil defenses were hardened, but not invulnerable. Sheikh Karimi base might be reduced to rubble, yet its destruction etched a burning lesson into the minds of defense planners from Washington to Tel Aviv, from Riyadh to Moscow. This confrontation did more than shift military postures, it redrew strategic boundaries. It revealed the limits of deterrence, the evolution of drone warfare, and the heavy cost of underestimating asymmetric threats in the 21st century. With oil prices still volatile and missile brigades still on alert, the next spark could ignite at any moment. One reality remains: when American logistics come under attack, a response is not optional, it is inevitable, and in that response lies a doctrine forged not in words, but in steel, strategy, and sacrifice. If this report gave you insight into the hidden mechanics of modern warfare and the stakes America faces abroad, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. Your support helps us deliver clarity, truth, and vigilance to a world that needs all three.